exceedingly abundant, so far beyond what I could dream. It's better, exceedingly abundantly, so far beyond all I could dream. It's exceedingly abundantly, so far beyond all I could dream. It's my testimony. Keeps on exceedingly abundantly, so far beyond all I could dream.
Started. I know there's some folks out in the foyer or North X, whichever way you like to go with that. I am very excited this morning that we have an opportunity for a combined Sunday school to learn something a little new, and from one of our own, because Bill Scott is one of ours. He's just been a missionary out of Clear Lake Church of the Nazarene, which I love. So I'm going to give him a very short introduction. I know he has 4 weeks of very packed information to share with us. And then also I want to let you know, just for this first Sunday, we have some snacks and what will be coffee coming. Starbucks apparently takes an hour and not 15 minutes, but that will be here. So once you leave, grab a snack, grab some coffee, and enjoy your morning. And the other thing is, we will be taking Sunday school offering this morning, so be ready for that towards the end. And if you're here all 4 weeks, I will be buying you a book to support the things that Bill has shared with us. So hopefully we'll see you 4 weeks in a row. So I'm going to introduce him quickly, even though we already know him, but now you'll know a little bit more about his background. Bill Scott is an apologist and public speaker. He holds a Master of Arts in Cultural Apologetics and a graduate certificate in Philosophical Apologetics from Houston Christian University. Bill and his wife, Tabitha, are residents of Houston and are chapter directors with Ratio Christi, is that how you say it? A campus apologetics alliance. Recently, he began working with apologetics on mission, began social media and YouTube ministry called The Truth Conversation, and you can scan the QR code to follow their YouTube channel, which is right up there on the screen, for weekly apologetics broadcast. So with no further ado, thank you, Bill and Tabitha, for being with us.
All right, thank you. Thank you, guys. We are glad to be here. Let me pull up. Well, isn't that funny? You have all that introduction and everything, and then you have this outline in front of you, and now it's left my tablet. So that is weird. If you guys could give me just a moment here. Yeah. In the meantime, you can scan the QR code and follow my apologetics channel. We just got that started, just got that off the ground. Well, for some reason, it seems that there's nobody upstairs, is there, Scott? Well, okay. Well, you'll just have to forgive me as I do this from memory because I have no other option. So yeah, Tab and I moved down here about 3 years ago to work with a group called Ratio Christi. And Ratio Christi stands for the Reason for Christ. The reason that we do the work that we're doing. Oh, we've got somebody up there. I don't know if you can airdrop that to me, but it's not a big deal. There's not much we can do at this point. Not without delaying Sunday school for another 5 minutes. So we don't have 5 minutes. We're just going to have to do this from memory. This is a real test of my knowledge right now. So hey, I'm going to have to do a lot of screen reading, but sorry. So we moved down here after doing church planting in eastern Kentucky, and we started realizing that one of our greatest reaches during that church plant was not the drug addicts we were reaching to, because we were certainly doing that. We had a drug recovery meeting every week. We were very passionate about that. We spent a lot of time in those neighborhoods reaching out to those people, and we had some fruit in that. It wasn't the general community that we were reaching. It wasn't even the youth we were reaching, even though we had about 40 students or so, or I'd say about 20 students or so being brought into our church every Tuesday night on a church van. We were reaching them. But our greatest fruit was really in the college students that were coming to our church from our local Bible college. And we noticed that the sort of fruit that was bore in their lives is really, it just continued to carry over. So it made sense to us to just step into college ministry full time. So here we are in Houston, Texas. Clear Lake was the first church that we attended, and we were glad to. We really miss Clear Lake, and we're glad to be here this month. Been looking forward to this ever since we put this together. But we are all the way on the other side of town, if you will, in next to Chinatown, working at Houston Christian University, and just really having a blast doing it. So that said, we're going to talk about a few things. Oh, there we go. Yeah, that said, we're going to talk about a few things. As it's been said, we work for Ratio Christi, which is Latin for the reason for Christ. And so that's what we do. Here's who we are. So we're going to talk about this in a few different ways. Apologetics 101. Today, we're going to talk about what is a good definition of apologetics, who needs apologetics, and then how do apologetics and evangelism work together. So first, let's look at a good definition of apologetics. If you brought your Bible this morning, you can turn to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. Of course, I have it up here on the screen too, but if you prefer your own translation, I believe this is in the New King James Version. But I love starting here for obvious reasons, not least because of my background, our background, being Wesleyans and things. I love that it starts with, any ministry starts with, sanctify the Lord God in your heart. That's where it begins. And always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. And so we will return to this verse a few times during this series, but today I just want to point out this word, give a defense. So people ask me, when I say I'm in full-time apologetics ministry now, they say, so you spend all of your time apologizing for things? Like, what is that exactly? What does that mean? But apologetics, it's a Greek term called apologia that means literally to give a defense for something. So if you think of like a lawyer, okay? A lawyer is making an apologetic for their client, if you will. They're making a defense before a skeptical audience, a jury, for example. And so what apologetics done and has done for centuries, ever since really the very first apologetic we find in Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, as Moses was answering the world religions of his day that were extremely pagan, that were extremely off the rails as far as morality is concerned, and they all had very similar narratives, and a lot of people try to use that to discount the Bible, and they'll say, well, isn't Noah's Ark just a retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh? I love it when an atheist asks me that, because I'm saying, which epic? The Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh? Or are you talking about the Assyrian Epic of Gilgamesh? Because there's two, right? And both of them are very perverted. They're very violent. They're very bloody. They're very gory. But it seemed that Moses said, no, here's true truth. That contained a little bit of truth. Yeah, there was a flood, but here is how it really happened. So you can see it all the way from the first chapters in Genesis, all the way up through Paul's ministry, through Jesus' ministry. We'll go through all that. But to give a defense for the faith that we believe in, not that our faith needs a defense, But there is a world out there that is yearning for a logical presentation of the Christian faith. And that's what we do. That's where we live. So here's some popular apologists, how they defined apologetics. Lee Strobel, he wrote one of the most recommended apologetic books of all time, The Case for Christ. He said, simply put, apologetics offers philosophical arguments and scientific and historical evidence for the truth of Christianity, while also providing good answers to tough questions that skeptics raise about the faith. Another awesome apologist, Douglas Grotas, which if any of you that are on social media, he is a good one to follow. He's a very conservative Christian. He said, the rational defense of the Christian worldview as objectively true, rationally compelling, and existentially or subjectively engaging. Those are some big, some of you are like, man, I haven't heard those words since college. But Doug Grotas, I really like Doug Grotas because he is a good introductory person to get into when it comes to this stuff. He wrote I think it's a 900-page book just called Christian Apologetics. It's about that thick. And it just covers all these different objections, one after the other, in about 20 pages, and really gives you, if you want a good introduction, he's a guy to go to. And then if you want to take it to the next level, William Lane Craig, he said, Christian apologetics may be defined as that branch of Christian theology which seeks to provide rational warrant for Christianity's truth claims. And so, predicated upon the idea that God, when he speaks, he says what's true. I believe that, you believe that. So if God says something that is true, then we also believe that there must be proof for that truth out there, because truth does not exist in a vacuum. There's things that point back to that truth. And as a Christian apologist, it is my privilege to teach people how to think Christianly, how to look at the world and evaluate it through a Christian lens. Not always, sometimes in a negative sense. Sometimes you can't help that. It's the world. It's fallen. There's some negativity out there, but also in a positive sense. For instance, when we read something like Plato and he says something about the transcendental, Plato's transcendentals, which is just simply goodness, truth, and beauty. Well, the Christian worldview has a lot to say about each one of those, doesn't it? That Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and all of those. So all truth is grounded in Jesus Christ, not in an idea, not in a concept, not in a philosophy, but in a person. It points back to him. God is the source of all goodness. Goodness is grounded in him. He's the absolute standard of good, so we can look back to God. And because he is good, because he is true, all that he creates is beautiful, including us. So he believes that so much, and God is committed to that so much that he was willing to give his own life for you and I. And not only that, but he called us as Christians to reach out, and not only redeem mankind, but redeem the world around us, as he says in the cultural mandate that he has given us dominion in all things. We'll talk about that in a later session. But he has called us to look out and see what ills are in the world and how we can correct those. We give people like PETA a hard time. I'm not talking about the bread. I'm talking about the, people for the ethical treatment of animals. And sometimes they absolutely deserve it. But you know what Christian started the very first animal rights group? John Wesley. As a matter of fact, as a product of the Wesleyan revival. You know what? You could trace the roots of Alcoholics Anonymous back to John Wesley, who started these band meetings and society meetings where people that were saved out of certain sins would band together and learn how to gain victory with each other. That's part of what we're called to do, isn't it? So, I'm going to be just as surprised about this next slide as you are. So here we go. A transition. Good. Okay. Apologetics. So who needs them? And this is a question that we get a lot. Who needs apologetics? And this really, the question is rooted in more so, can apologetics really save anybody? you know, I asked Doug Grotas and I have become friends just in this past year. And by the way, on my YouTube channel, you can watch a couple of interviews with a couple of conversations we had about world religions and things. And so when you're getting to know these guys, man, the wisdom that comes out of somebody like that's mouth time to time just blows your mind. I asked him this question because I was to give a presentation at a church last year. And the pastor said, just make sure you let everybody know that apologetics can't save anybody. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I mean, I don't believe apologetics can save people. I don't believe preaching can save people either. I don't believe Bible studies can save people or reading a book can save somebody. But it can point people to Christ. Everything that we do is limited in some form or another. But it's Jesus who saves people. That's not my job. But my job is to use the tools and things that God has given me to make a defense for these things. When people read something in the Bible like, well, isn't God just a moral monster? Look at all the genocide that he commanded in the Old Testament. Like, but doesn't it say that he gave them 450 years to repent before he commanded those slaughters? And who wants a God in heaven that is a God that is unjust? That wouldn't be much of a heaven if God was unjust now, would it? So tearing down those strongholds, being able to talk to people like that has been so fruitful, and I've seen it more and more as I've been committed to it. William Lane Craig said, apologetics plays a vital and I think indeed a crucial role in shaping culture, strengthening believers and in evangelizing unbelievers. And it is for all these reasons that I am unapologetically enthusiastic about Christian apologetics. Pun certainly intended. This verse says it all for me. I watched an apologist before I moved down here, and this really opened up my world. In my own mind, I was thinking, this is an intellectual exercise. This is memorizing things. This is memorizing arguments. This is doing, and being ready, that when I hear the objection, I can give that 3-point syllogism, that logic equation that will get them thinking, right? But I saw J.P. Moreland, who's one of the world's greatest apologists and Christian philosophers. Humble, gentle. Oh, that was exciting. That was a full body experience there. That fell out of my back pocket and jerked this thing off my ear. No more interruptions. Okay, so Moreland was talking about this, and he said, apologetics has a lot to do with spiritual warfare. A lot to do with spiritual warfare. And I was like, I'm hearing you. What do you have to say? And he did an expository sermon on this one verse. He said, for we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. What is a stronghold? Anybody know in the Greek? In the Greek, it points to an idea in somebody's mind. It's like a fortress. And in this context, it's a fortress in somebody's mind who is keeping them from going all the way with the gospel. It's this one thing. It's like, maybe you've met somebody like this that I want to believe in Christianity, but there's this one thing that's holding me back. I just can't reconcile this. And he said, we need to recognize that as this is a spiritual stronghold. This isn't just an intellectual exercise. This is a spiritual stronghold. Casting down arguments. Now we do have an interruption. Because now the microphone has fell off the thing here. Hold on just a second. Oh, and I see tape too. Does this thing work? All right, let's just do this. There we go. Make sure you mute that lapel mic. That'd be awful. Okay. So, for pulling down these strongholds in people's minds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. And so when you're talking about pulling down a an idea in somebody's mind that's keeping them from God's truth, an argument that Satan has put up in their mind. This is where apologetics becomes very real in a ministerial sense. This argument is exalting itself against the knowledge of God, which is a big problem because truth does what? Sets you free, does it not? Bringing and then teaching Christians to bring every thought into captivity, into the obedience of Christ. You know, Satan's first area of attack, believer or non-believer, in somebody's life is going to be the mind. It's going to be the mind. To draw you away from the truth of Christ, bring doubt, cause confusion, bring lies into your life. That's why Jesus called us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And you know what? In the Christian worldview, those are not four separate things. That's a unified field of knowledge. All of those things go together. Francis Schaeffer clearly point out all the new theology and mysticism is nothing more than a faith contrary to rationality, deprived of content, and incapable of contentful communication. Rationality and faith are out of contact with each other. By the way, you have to contextualize Francis Schaeffer because he was writing in the 60s and 70s. What he was calling the new theology and mysticism is what has evolved into today, what we call progressive Christianity. It's a faith that does not have any foundation in truth, but it's purely subjective, purely personal to the person, and has no theological foundation, has no historical foundation, has no doctrinal foundation. It is just a free-floating someone's idea of what Christianity may be. And so he posited this little chart that is so powerful when you think about society. This is Schaeffer's famous line of despair. And I'll admit, off the bat, just get it out of the way, there are people that criticize Francis Schaeffer, and I understand their criticisms. As a philosopher, he tended to paint it with a very broad brush, and this thing can apply to everything all the time. But in some sense, or at least in a very exacting sense, but in a very general sense, he was onto something. He was very much onto something. And so what I mean by that is, while the limitation is we can't say every philosopher, every artist, every music, every piece of culture, but as a whole, you can see this degeneration. So let me explain this. So here you have a line of despair. And so the line of despair is a timeline, okay? You know, and as time progresses, we're moving down the course of descent. Most ideas, whether good or bad, begin with philosophers, whether we like it or not. Whether we like it or not. I mean, that's just reality. And in the sense of how an idea will affect a culture. Even theology is, in one sense, a philosophy of life. Even in the way that we think about what we're doing as Christians is a philosophy of life. Now, those of you that follow philosophy, I am not a huge fan of analytic philosophy. I think sometimes it can get way too narrow. And you'll spend 6 months writing a very technical paper that 5 people will read. But there's some value to it. Now, philosophy in a general sense, as we trickled down this line, as it began to move away from the idea of absolute truth, philosophy then began to affect the world of art. One of the things that I really love to do is take students, skeptics, friends, or whatever. You can't get me to shut up in an art museum. Mike experienced that this morning. He noticed there was a Van Gogh on the back of my computer, and I said, you know why I like that Van Gogh? I started explaining all that. It's interesting that if you walk through an art museum, you work your way from the medieval to the Renaissance period into the modern, postmodern artists, you start noticing the lines begin to be blurred, don't you? Think of a Monet when you know, of course Monet was partially blind, but You know, you think of a Monet and you look at a bridge, it's all blurry, isn't it? There's no definition in there. I mean, when you look at a piece of art that's 500 years before that, that bridge is going to be detailed. There's going to be a lot of detail there. And so these men write in their journals and things, and we'll get into this more in some future sessions. They get into their journals, they're writing and why they're doing art the way they're doing art. And it's because they're embracing the philosophies of their day. That as they moved away from absolute truth as a philosophy, as a unified field of knowledge, which Christianity is completely based upon, we can't move away from it, it began to affect the artistic world. And then as art moved away, so did music. And of course, Francis Schaeffer was critiquing classical music in his day and age, and he was critiquing jazz and other things, which that hurts my heart because I love jazz. But he was saying, but the difference between a modern Bach jazz piece and a Bach is that Bach believed in Jesus Christ, and you could hear that in his music, in that every note had its place. Everything that he did was very exact and very predicated upon the idea that he was communicating truth to a culture, whereas a jazz musician gets up there and makes it up. That's why I like it. You know, you just get up there and play, man. It's an existential experience. You just have a good time. Then, of course, I don't have to explain this. Not so much art anymore, but I would say a certain form of art, a very low form of art, whether it be memes on social media or media in general, music, of course that shapes culture. I don't have to make a case for that. My goodness, what's a Taylor Swift fan called? Say it. Exactly. I don't have to see. Obviously, it shapes culture. You know what that, there's a significant amount of people in this room knows exactly what a Swiftie is as soon as I say that. For those of you that live under a rock, that's a Taylor Swift fan. And then you have theology. So what happens when all of this begins to shape our theology? And then you have the German school, the neoliberals, the Karl Barth, which is nothing compared to what we have today. You know, I had a student, one of my officers in Ratio Christi, walks up to me the other day, was excited about reading Karl Barth. And those of you who know who he is, he's like one of the roots of every problem we have today in the church. Because he was a theologian that was making some sort of defense for the Bible. I was like, is that how low the bar is when you're reading theology right now? Couldn't imagine what Francis Schaeffer would have to say today. Couldn't imagine what he'd have to say. I'm sure there'd be another step in there. I'm not smart enough to figure it out. I'm sure there'd be something else. So what he said with this, by the way, around here in 1935, he said that's where we crossed this line. That's where the line of despair is, right there, where you put that dot. The cultural shift has become so departed now from truth. By 1935, it was affecting theology. So now here we are, almost 100 years later. And we wonder why people are moving astray, why people are going astray. You know, it's like we have to be able to answer it like this. We have to be able to say it like here's the progress, here's the progression. So here's the answer. So this is what it looked like. Schaeffer said it like this. Pre-line of despair, you had a unified field of knowledge, okay? There was no upper and lower story. Now I want you to think of upper and lower story just like you would this church, for example. There's a balcony up here. That's your upper story. And then there's a lower story where you're sitting. Where you're sitting is most accessible, isn't it? To get up to that balcony, we have to walk up the steps. We have to do all these things. It's not nearly as accessible. Well, before the line of despair, nobody thought that religion and theology, at least on a popular level, the culture wasn't thinking that religious knowledge and other forms of knowledge were two different kinds of knowledge. It just all worked together seamlessly. It's hard for us to even imagine today that there was a time in this country where people saw knowledge as all-encompassing. And so what happened was, we divided truth. now into subjective and objective truth. Subjective truth is personal truth. We hear it in the old adage, it might be true for you, but it's not true for me. It really bugs me when I hear Christians say that. Because especially Christians need to understand, if it's true for me, it's true for everybody. And if it's not true for me, I need to forget it. That's it. If Jesus rose from the dead in history, if he rose from the dead, it changes everything. That's objective truth. But now society is pushing the objective truth of the historical resurrection of Jesus Christ, as just one example, into the subjective realm. Well, that's what Christians believe. That's not what my Muslim neighbor believes, though. And who am I to tell him that he is wrong? That's just his cultural way to God. But what if his cultural way to God makes historical claims too? Let's say that Jesus was not crucified and did not raise from the dead. That totally invalidates my faith. Those two things cannot exist in reality together. One of them has to be real, the other one has to be. But we can't think like that. I'm not saying we, I'm saying like the royal we, if you will. Everybody, the culture, has a hard time thinking that way now. Even Christian students have a hard time thinking. And so now, religion, where it used to be a knowable truth, used to be something that was objective, something that was just a basic presupposition for every way of life, has been pushed now into a subjective way of thinking. This used to be the way we thought. This was the basis, and your individual beliefs didn't really matter nearly as much as what the Bible taught. That was probably, all the way up past the Reformation years and into the years of the Enlightenment. So now, past the line of despair, religion has been moved into the unknowable sphere of truth, and now subjectivism is completely ruling the day. I hope you guys were able to follow that. But in summary, what's happened is we've moved away from this unified field of knowledge where it's not just religious truth, but it's biblical Christian truth has something to say about everything. And now in our postmodern, we don't even have a postmodern culture. Postmodern cultures don't exist. You know that, right? Nobody can exist in a postmodern framework because because truth has to be truth. Postmodernism says that it's all subjective truth, right? Everything is subjective to the person. And that works just fine, I guess, until you have a headache and you have to decide between reaching for the rat poison or an Advil. All of a sudden, what the words say on that bottle has very deep meaning. One mistake could take your life, but people can't think of that in a religious framework because this is about God. And who could be so prideful and arrogant to know absolute truths about God? That's where we are. That is where our chaos comes from. That is where we have to go. And Schaeffer and many others before and after him, by the way, have said, whenever we think about doing evangelism, especially to millennial, Gen Z, and now they're calling the next one coming up Gen Alpha, whenever we begin to talk about the Christian faith with those students, we have to begin with, here's why I believe in this. Not just here's what to believe. Matter of fact, I heard one apologist said it, and I believe he's absolutely right. He's the son of Josh McDowell. You guys have been around longer than I have. Remember Evidence That Demands a Verdict? Josh McDowell started a real firestorm in this nation with that book. Because he said, here I am as an atheist. I investigated all the truth claims in the Bible, and here it all is. It's all there. I can historically verify these things. This is insane. I never knew we could do this. Well, he's not the first to do that. But that book took the world by fire. And then you had Sean McDowell, his son. He said in one of his newest books, he said, for every what you say to this generation, have to give two whys. For every what you say, you have to give two whys in order for them to comprehend it. because they're removed from this unified field of knowledge. They're removed from truth claims. So let me give you just one example. Well, I believe Jesus rose from the dead. Okay, you believe that. Why do you believe that? Well, just off the top of my head, have you ever read 1 Corinthians 15? Well, I've not read 1 Corinthians 15. Well, here's what 1 Corinthians 15 says. That Jesus rose from the dead. There were 500 witnesses, and Paul, who wrote that, was a former Pharisee. Okay? I've already gave one truth claim. I'm moving to the other. Paul is a former Pharisee. Why is that important? Well, because he was commissioned to go out and persecute Christians and stop this truth claim of Jesus Christ. And he met with Jesus Christ and decided to commit his entire life to it. Probably gave up a pretty easy life in Jerusalem. I mean, truth be told, the guy was pretty far up in the Pharisaical schools and realm, or he wouldn't have been commissioned on such a task in the first place. So here he gave up his whole livelihood just to go out and tell people about this Jesus in which he hated the day before he got saved in a road to Damascus, and then eventually lost his head over it. There's two truth claims. On top of that, there's Josephus and Tacitus that wrote about the Christians who worship the man who was crucified by the Romans named Jesus Christ. There's another truth. There's another why for the what. So I've already moved into like 3 or 4 there. Okay, and I see this over and over again. At about that point, that's when they start listening. Oh, wait. I mean, this is rational? Yep, it's rational. I give apologetics presentations all over this country. When I give that historicity of I've got one in particular called the historicity of the resurrection. I've seen people get saved over and over again on that because they've been going to church their whole life and never made the rational connection. This is real. This actually happened. This is not casual. This demands my life and my all. Apologetics and evangelism have to be linked together. Western society is a post-truth and thus a post-Christian culture with an inherently divided field of knowledge. How can you do it without apologetics? That's what I say. How can I talk to, especially in Houston, Texas, with all these world religions around us, how can you even have a gospel conversation? Do you have a fruitful conversation about this world religion first? I wrote my thesis on this, how every world religion that I have ever studied has enough truth in it to point it back to the gospel somehow. There's no way that those things can exist that long. Without that, bad ideas don't last very long. It's those that contain truth that last a while. So I'm not saying that every world religion is not true. I'm saying they're not the full truth. There's enough truth in them to be dangerous. There's not enough truth in them to save. But there's enough truth in them where we as Christians, if we have a basic understanding, can say, this is interesting. How come the Quran says X, Y, and Z? That sounds a whole lot like the Bible. Oh, the Bible says that? Yeah, it does. Check out the Gospel of Matthew or John. Hey, would you like one of these in Arabic? You can take it home and read it. And tell me what you think about it next week over coffee. Sometimes that's all it takes. Being willing to have that kind of conversation. Same way with a Gen Z kid who has all kinds of questions about their friends who've adopted various lifestyles and ideas and all these other things and have picked up all of their theology from TikTok. And then we dismiss that and say, TikTok, well, that's stupid. I was one of those people until about last year. It kind of hit me. If I want to start reaching high schoolers now, that's going to be my students in the next 3 years, I have to take TikTok a little more seriously. There's enough bad theology, bad ideas on TikTok that will just absolutely ruin somebody's faith if they take it. But they don't understand a unified field of knowledge. They don't see the Bible as something that is foundational. They don't see all that. So it's my job to open that up to them. But yeah, you know that guy that said that on TikTok? Well, here's the best answer. Oh, that makes sense. Because they take that very seriously. Christians cannot afford to be indifferent to the outcome of this struggle. For the single most important institution shaping the Western culture is the university. It is at the university that our future political leaders, journalists, teachers, Business executives, lawyers, and artists will be trained. It is at the university that they will formulate, or more likely simply absorb, the worldview that will shape their lives. And since these are the opinion makers and leaders who shape our culture, the worldview they imbibe at the university will be the one that shapes our culture. Plain and simple. Notice that came from a book, Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview by J.P. Moreland and William Lane Craig. Had nothing to do with universities, but that was in the introduction. But it has to start here, folks. We have a country that has been built upon Christian, and in some ways we have to own this too, some post-Enlightenment ideas. And we need to be able to answer this, because right now the post-Enlightenment ideas that have been planted as seeds in our culture for 2 centuries is really starting to come to light and is really starting to take over. We'll talk about this as we move forward, but things like social contract theory. You never have a marriage debate now without social contract theory. But Christians don't even have a clue as what that is. What does that mean? I'll tell you who does have a clue. Children, your grandchildren, your nieces and your nephews, your neighbors that are going to school right now, and they just get this fed into them. And they just take it. Say, well, must be true. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. I just need to pass this test. But the information still goes there. The seed is planted. No, and I want to push this to, as we draw it to a close here. No idea in the West exists in a vacuum. This is not just about us. This is not just about, oh man, how do we get this country on track? That's not what apologetics is about. And that's not what Christianity is about, by the way. It's about how do we win our neighbor? How do we love our neighbor as ourselves? How do we bring this? And how do we complete the Great Commission? You look at this, the ideology of nothing's wrong and nothing's right is spreading across Africa like a bushfire. Its poisonous effect gnaws deep with every year that passes. Even from Reuben Kigame, obviously not an American apologist, Christian Apologetics Through African Eyes. By the way, the foreword was by Josh McDowell. Same guy I mentioned, Evidence Demands a Verdict guy. What happens in the West never stays in the West. And we have to take that. I'm not trying to put a heavy burden on your shoulders, but we have to take this seriously. Because the onus is on us, isn't it? No, we have to take responsibility as Americans. I have an African friend right now that left Rwanda to go minister to Muslims in Pakistan. Led 17 Muslims to the Lord last night. Praise God. I want to hear about that from the United States more too. Now I know that I'm talking to a church that has a rich missional heritage. I'm not jumping on anybody. But it astounds me that we think that something happens in America, it doesn't have any effect. It has a ripple effect all over this world. And so Christian apologetics goes into that culture, says, okay, because XYZ is happening, we need to ABC, shape all this up, get all this together. Let's discuss this. And you're starting to see right now an apologetics revival happening in East Africa right now. In Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, they're just going nuts. South Africa, they're loving this because they always thought that faith meant I don't have to have any evidence. But faith, clearly and simply put, is that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Faith by its very nature in Christianity is evidence not only in the fruit that we bear as Christians, but in the logical workings out of the claims that we make. So, moving toward this complete worldview, week 1, we've already went through this, introduction to apologetics. You can see weeks 2, 3, and 4 where we will be going. Cultural apologetics, various apologetic proofs, and then lastly, applying apologetics to the culture. And I do believe we're going to have a great time. Sadly, it is 10:15, and maybe we can have time for a couple of questions, and I'll be here after. And you like this kind of thing, scan the QR code or see me afterwards. I'll point you toward our YouTube channel. You get some more content like this monthly. Does anybody have a question? Okay, then go get your coffee and come talk to me if you have one. Thank you. Oh, and by the way,
surrounds me.